On this week's episode of the Investors Corner, me and Mike are going to discuss a question that I've recently saw in a landlords group on Facebook. Question being, should I continue to manage the properties myself that I own and rent, or should I get an agent to do it? Now, about 80% of the comments that came back said always get an agent to do it. Obviously, the 20% were either portfolio landlords or landlords that have been doing it a while, so they understood the regulations and understood processes, etc., etc. So I thought, well, let's discuss it in a podcast episode. So 3 topics in this one: time and effort to manage a tenancy from start to finish, cost and financial impact of managing a tenancy, and expertise and legal knowledge of letting a property. So if you are a landlord that manages your own property or looking to rent a property and doesn't know whether to do it yourself or use an agent, then this one is definitely for you to listen to. So make sure that you sit back, enjoy the episode, and you subscribe to the Investors Corner podcast. Okay, so we are back for another episode of the Investors Corner, and I am joined by Mike. Mike, how are we?
Very well, thank you.
Good, just me and you today. And I want to pick your brains on something. So you've been in the industry for a while, so have I. And one of the questions that comes up the most that I hear from clients is, should I continue to manage the property myself, or should I get an agent to do it for me? And it's popped into my head because I saw a Facebook post recently where that question was asked, and probably there were 90 comments that came back. And this was a landlord group on Facebook. Now, probably 80% of them said that they would always get an agent to do it. And the other 20% do it themselves. They've been doing it for a number of years. So they feel that they know the ins and outs of everything and they're quite comfortable doing it themselves. And they said that they would never instruct an agent to do it because it's quite a simple process to do. So in this episode, I want to cover 3 topics. So first one being time and effort to manage the property from start to finish. Cost and financial impact of managing a tenancy, and expertise and legal knowledge of everything. So let's start with the first one then. So time and effort. Now, we know how time consuming it can be to rent a property, from putting it on the market, doing all the marketing, doing all of the viewings, getting all the offers coming in, and then speaking to the client regarding the offer and doing the tenancy agreement and all of that sort of stuff. But as a self-managing landlord, they obviously tend to use Open Rent to do all their stuff. So it's quite a automated platform that they use. But marketing wise, we always bang on about marketing, saying that if you want to attract the best people and you want to get the best possible price, your marketing needs to be on point, and it needs to be different to any other property that is on the market, so you get the people coming to yours first. Now, as an agent, we do the marketing, we do the video, we do the photos, we do the social media side of things. Do you think that self-managing landlords are losing out on not having an agent do that and just using an Open Rent platform where they put, some of the photos that you see on Open Rent are dodgy as.
Yeah, there's a lot of portrait shape and dark and reflections of themselves in mirrors. But I could say that about agents around the country as well, which I guess is what's driven a lot of people to do it themselves. Yeah. So I think there's an element of, in life, you can do anything you want yourself. You can write your own will, but there's a big will writing industry. You can check the house that you're buying, but you can also employ a surveyor. You can sell your own car. But why is it that a professional car dealer will get a lot more money for a car than a private sale will? So, for everything in life, you trade off, as you quite rightly said, you trade off time against money, don't you? Yeah. Is your next 2 or 3 Saturdays and your evenings and your phone worth the X amount in lettings costs and the compliance headache taken away from you? That's the question that some landlords got to ask themselves. Out of that Facebook post, the 20% who said no, it's not worth using an agent will either be one of two people. They'll either be absolute pro landlords who have a number of properties and they've absolutely got it down. They'll be using a CRM system. They'll be databasing stuff. They'll have platforms in place to make things work.
Yeah.
Or there'll be rank amateurs. And they're the ones that you're looking at and laughing at their marketing because they're just tight. And they think by saving X amount up front and maybe a monthly amount for management, they think they're winning.
Yeah.
And that's the same when you come to sell your house. You can pay an estate agent 1.5% to do a good job for you, or you can pay nothing and list it with Strike or whatever they're called these days, and take your chances. And some people will win by listing it for nothing and taking their chances. Others will lose heavily.
Yeah.
And it depends whether you want to play that gamble, I guess.
Yeah, and I think, if you use a professional agent to market your property, you're going to attract better people because you've put that property in a better light. Now, people that use self-managing platforms, and it's not just Open Rent, there's other ones out there as well, I think don't tend to have any advice given to them on what that property should be achieving. They could potentially be losing out on their investment because they're asking for a cheaper rent.
Conversely, I see a lot of open renty type agents, and the prices are wildly high. Maybe they've put a 3-bed house on the market for $2,500 a month, because the 3 local agents have all told them 1,750, 1,800, and they think they know better, and they leave it on the market for months trying to get the higher price, and eventually maybe do, but don't see that they've lost £5,000 achieving a few £100 a month extra. So it can go both ways on the pricing.
I suppose it can work either way. It just
for what I see on Rightmove, it can go both ways on the pricing.
No, that's absolutely. And I think going back to, obviously you've got the marketing side of things, then you've got the inquiries coming through. So, you're probably getting around 20 to 30 inquiries per property that are coming up on the market now.
Easily.
We had one recently in Crowthorne. Within 24 hours, there was probably 20 inquiries coming through. So going back to the time element, again, it's just, do you want to spend your time shifting through 20 to 30 inquiries, checking the affordability, checking the current situation of the tenant, checking when do they want to move in, is the affordability there for a tenant? So these are all questions that you've got to ask when you're speaking to these applicants. And sometimes it could take hours. It could take absolute hours to go through and qualify these people correctly. I think some landlords deal with all the inquiries and don't ask the correct questions. They're wasting more time by showing people their property only to find out further on down the line that they're not suitable because the affordability is not there, or they're not employed, or something like that. So again, going back to the agent versus self-managing, well, if you use an agent, they deal with all of that. They deal with all that rubbish, asking questions, all of that sort of stuff, and trying to find you a tenant where you can save hours and hours of your personal time to spend more time with your family or concentrate on things that you want to do, rather than getting bombarded with tenants left, right and centre. So I think it just depends how much you value time, really, doesn't it?
It's exactly that, I think, and that's the easiest comparison you can make, is you can genuinely pretty much do anything for yourself. But you need to weigh up, do you want it to take up your weekends and evenings and some of your working time as day as well, or do you not? And do you want to spend the time researching and knowing all about it before you start, or would you rather just palm that off onto a professional who can do it for you? And people have to make those decisions. Generally speaking, people who have property are in an asset class where they will be a little bit more wealthy and time poor in general. But there's aspects of it. I think there's 180 bits of legislation covering the lettings industry, ever increasing. And do you have the access to be able to comply with all of those? So if you're going to rent your property privately, how are you going to reference your tenants? Are you going to be able to do the correct right to rent checks and make sure the tenant provides you with a share code Are you going to be able to maintain that on an annual basis? Are you going to be able to prove and maintain your gas and electricity safety records, etc., 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 to keep yourself compliant?
Yeah.
If not, then you have to pay for it. As I say, out of that 20%, I'm sure there'll be a split down the middle of the people who do it really, really well and the people who do it really, really badly. And the only reason they're still doing it really, really badly is because they haven't got unlucky yet.
Yeah. And I think that's what it comes down to.
They've
had an easy ride,
Yeah.
thought that it was easy, and yeah, nothing's happened to them. But things are obviously getting a lot harder. Things will get harder in the rental sector as well. So maybe that's why this question was asked on Facebook, is you've got people thinking that actually it is going to get harder. There's going to be
it's very easy to find a tenant. And the impression people have of a letting agent and an estate agent is whack it on Rightmove, get a tenant, move them in.
Yeah.
The tenant finding is the easiest bit. Choosing the correct tenant is slightly more of an art form based on experience and certain metrics. But then the ongoing management is where the skill comes into it. And some landlords see the value and some never see the value because things don't go wrong. But you're there when it does.
Yeah.
To make sure that the landlord is looked after and the property and the asset is protected.
Yeah.
In the right way.
Yeah, and then coming on to referencing as well. So the referencing side of things is the crucial part for me, because that is going to give you a sort of brief overview of what who that tenant is. Sorry, not what that tenant is. Who that tenant is.
A person, hopefully.
Who that tenant is. But there's also, there's companies out there that you can get a reference for a tenant, and they would give you their recommendation. They accept no responsibility for that referencing report. Ultimately, the decision still lies with you. But there's other things that you need to check from that reference report. So there's Google searches. You've got open banking now, which I've noticed that some agencies don't even do open banking yet. They're well behind the times on that. There's other things, doing an email check. When was the email address for the employer created? Have you checked the employer on Rightmove? Have you on Google? Have you checked it on Company's House?
Yeah.
So all of these extra checks is what an agent should do. Whether they do that or not, don't know. I certainly do that. But if you just get a reference report, many people that are self-managing their property would just see the green on it, passed, and then not do any further checks and move that tenant in. So again, the value there from an agent, in my opinion, is that they would do all of these additional checks because they're the experts in doing it. As well as other things as well, like the tenancy agreement, and dealing with the offers, dealing with the viewings and all that. So time-wise, they do a lot.
Yeah, serving the correct things at the correct times, because it's all very well giving someone a tenancy agreement and hopefully registering their deposit, but have they been served with the prescribed information? Have they been served with a how to rent guide? Have they been served with the right paperwork all at the right times? Otherwise, all of that paperwork, all of that time that you've spent is wasted.
Yeah.
And within the referencing, great, they gave you their passport. Okay, it's a Belgian passport. Tell me whether that Belgian passport's real or fake.
Yeah.
I'm an estate agent. I've been on training. I can't tell you whether that Belgian passport is real or fake. Belgium have probably issued 10 passports in the last 12 years or whatever it is with different changes. That needs to go through some sort of electronic reader to check. I think it's the MRZ code at the bottom and the font and the spacing and the colons to ensure that that's actually a real passport, because the first thing a fraudster will do is give you a fake document, and you have to have a way of checking whether that's a real document or not, because they will look legit on Facebook, they will look legit on LinkedIn, they will look legit when you ring their employer and ask, because they will have set that all up, because that's the basics. It's finding the nitty gritty details to find out when you've got a really, really bad egg.
Yeah. Not
just someone who's trying to blag the income to ensure they get past the references.
I mean, you look at bank statements now, tax returns, self-employed documents, pay slips. I mean, there's websites out there where you can just order them online.
Yeah.
You could literally get one for 20 quid, just tell them what you want on it, and then they'll supply it to you, and, you know, they'll give these checks. That's why, you know, it's going away from manual checks now. Everything has got to be done through electronically or through technology to pick up these things that fraudsters out there are doing. Now, fraud levels are up by about 2-3% across the UK. So they're still going on out there, and you'll always have those type of people coming through. But, you know, you see the technology coming through. If you deal with the right suppliers and the right systems, these fraudsters cannot get through now. So it's becoming more sophisticated. But again, it goes back to, if you're doing it yourself and you're doing these manual checks, at some point, you're going to get caught out. It's just going to happen. So again, that's why you need to use professional referencing agency or professional agent to do all of this stuff for you. And that's what you pay for.
Yeah.
You pay for the security of that reference being done correctly. So you're getting no fraudsters coming into your property, creating weed farms, not paying your rent for 12 months, etc., etc. Because as soon as that happens, you're screwed. You're not getting your money. So yeah, there's some things there. So that's the initial part. It's the referencing, the tenancy agreement. Make sure that it's all legit, and the marketing side of things as well. Now the next point is sort of cost and financial impact. So you might pay an agent, I don't know what's standard fee now, 10% fully managed fee. So yeah, if your rent's 1,500 a month, you're paying them 150 quid a month plus VAT. Now, if you weigh up what an agent does for that, so they collect the rent, they deal with any rental arrears, they'll deal with any maintenance issues. You know, they have to pay for a 24/7 helpline, an out-of-hours service so the tenant can call. They have to serve relevant documentation to a tenant. They've got all of the follow-up checks to do as well through that. They are the point of contact to look after your asset, to look after your investment. And probably what it's going to be, you might spend an hour, 2 hours a week dealing with that property. So again, has a landlord got that time? Does a landlord want to be disturbed at midnight because there's been a leak at the property, and then they're trying to rush around trying to find a contractor to go out there to fix the problem so there's less damage caused to their property? The majority don't. They just don't. But clients that I've spoken to before, when they turn around to me and say, "Don't worry, I'll do it myself. You know, I'm not paying that." They don't even think about these types of issues. No matter how much you explain it to them, they just think they're going to have a nice breeze through. And then you'll get a call 3 months later and say, "Andy, I should listen to you.
Yeah.
I've done nothing but deal with the tenants of this property." So again, can you deal with it correctly? Have you got the contractors around you that they can drop things for you and go to the property? Again, with an agency, they've probably got 5 or 6 contractors on their book that if they call, contractors will go out.
Yeah, that's always been one of those unwritten things, isn't it? And it's something that I've said to landlords quite often is, if in February your boiler goes down because there's a cold snap and you can't get hold of a gas engineer, there's a reason for that. Is because that gas engineer is dealing with who they're loyal to, who feeds them 12 months of the year, not the one-off caller. They'll be back to back with the big estate agent's work all day, who's booked them out to do 6 jobs, and that's who they'll listen to in some cases. So in some cases, there's buying power with a letting agent, that if we call our electrician or our plumber or this, that, and the other, they're going to jump because they can see how much money we put through them on an annual basis. And as long as you have a good working relationship with them rather than a using one, you'll get that. Those when you need to call in a favour as a property manager, and you know who you can call in a favour from. It's like, look, I just needed to do this one. They'll be straight out to do it because you've booked them 15 times that month already. It's you know, there's a two-way relationship with really good trades. So it's a big benefit to a landlord that they've got that, I think. But yeah, it all comes down to that same question: is do you want that hassle? Do you want that grief? Whilst everything else in life is kind of going on around you.
Yeah, for the sake of, a small percentage of.
Well, it's a
paying
tax
the
deductible
rent,
cost, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one of those things. Everybody sees value differently.
Yeah.
And there's certain things that some people will pay for, some things that they won't. There's some things that I'm incredibly tight on.
Yeah.
I've got one skybox and I move it about 10 times a week. Goes upstairs, it goes downstairs, it goes upstairs, it goes downstairs.
Yeah.
I need to sort that out, but I can't be bothered to pay an extra 12 quid to get a second puck.
Yeah.
I'm sure I could find that 12 quid.
Yeah.
Just don't want to.
Don't want to.
So
what if it was a property or investment property though, and it was worth 250 grand?
Well, that's the difference, isn't it? It's irrational. There's no reason to be that irrationally tight over something. And I think other people, whether the agent hasn't explained the value well enough, or whether that agent's pricing is wrong, is totally up for discussion, isn't it?
Yeah, I think so. If you look at what an agent can offer in their fully managed service and people have explained it correctly on what that service covers, then to me as a landlord or a property investor, there'd be no doubt in my mind that, hang on a minute, 10%, that's nothing for, my investment being looked after by a professional person.
Yeah.
So, if anything goes wrong with it,
I'm
going straight to that. I'm going straight to that agent and saying, that's your problem. Yeah. That's not my problem. Yeah. Call me when you've sorted it. Yeah. Don't call me to tell me about a problem and not do anything about it. Yeah. So it just gives you that leeway, and then again, it gives you more time to spend with your family, do your hobbies or anything like that, because it's just sort of let it and forget about it. That's the whole point of getting.
I think overall these sorts of service jobs have become normalised, and that's why the 80% of those comments were to use an agent. You've got a financial advisor who looks after your pension. You've got an agent who looks after your property. Yeah. You've got a service contract on your boiler to know that your heating's looked after. You've got a maintenance on your leased car, so you know that's covered. You're paying the extra cost for everything to ensure that you're looked after, rather than maybe two generations ago where your dad or your granddad would be fixing everything and dealing with everything themselves to save a few quid here and there. It's a slightly different world that we're in our generation.
Yeah. Well, I think if you look at the financial penalties of some of the things that if you miss, then it might change people's mind out there. So I'm going to go through some of these liabilities. Give you some numbers. Right. So not registering a tenant's deposit within 30 days of receiving it. Now, some people get caught out by this, because I've spoken to some clients in the past that have received the deposit money, say 2 months before the tenant moves in. Yeah. But some clients think that it's 30 days from when the tenancy starts, not actually receiving the physical money. So I know people
deal with client money.
Exactly. Yeah. So I know people that have been caught out. I've actually worked for agents that have been caught out in this regard. So if you don't register it within 30 days of receiving it, then tenant can claim up to 3 times the amount of deposit. You can't serve, it prevents you from serving a Section 21 notice until the deposit's been registered. So right there, straight off the bat, you've got up to 3 times the amount of deposit. So it's 15 weeks rent, isn't it?
And you can't actually get rid of your tenant.
And you can't actually get rid of your tenant. Or it's going to cause complications if you register it when you serve the Section 21 notice. Yeah. We all know what judges do. They tend to rule in favour of a tenant. So anything like this could potentially put you at risk. So that could cost you 15 weeks rent and getting your property back. EPCs, so fines for non-compliance, reach up to £5,000. Again, you won't be able to serve a Section 21 notice. Yeah. So again, another massive implication there. Gas safety certificates. If you don't have a valid gas cert, then £6,000 fine. Could lead to imprisonment, invalidate your insurance. So again,
Yeah, I was going to say
financial
the gas
implications of
one.
that.
You're a criminal.
Yeah.
If you're not doing it, it's not just a civil penalty. You're physically a criminal for not doing it.
If there's any landlords out there that don't have gas safety certificates for their property or not serving it to the tenants, silly billies. Give me a call and I'll speak to you. Next one, EICRs, so your electrical inspection condition report, up to £30,000 fine if you don't have one, and again it invalidates your insurance. So if anything goes wrong with your property, catches fire, you're not getting a penny for that. Carbon monoxide alarms, smoke alarms, fines up to £5,000. Same with right to rent checks. That's now increased to £10,000 per tenant if you don't do the correct right to rent check. So financially, you could lose out on thousands and thousands and thousands. And I've seen recently over the last week or so, every bit of news that comes in.
Yeah.
I swear to God, it's a landlord being fined £150,000, £20,000, £40,000. And I think there's just a lot more regulation out there now. There's a lot more companies out there or councils out there that know that they can penalise landlords, because the majority of landlords don't know what they need to do to rent a property and how to be compliant with that property. It's a fact. Only a small percentage know all of the regulations that are out there and what needs to be done. So you've got people coming down hard on these landlords. And again, it's just a reason to think, why do I want that responsibility? Why do I want to try and save a few quid? Why do I want to try and be in control of my property when I don't know all of the regulations and exactly what I need to do? Because at some point it will catch up with you. You'll get caught out.
So you ran a scorecard survey recently, which was an open survey for landlords about how compliant are you, which was pushed out on a social ad. What were the percentages? What was the feedback?
No one hit 100%.
Okay.
So no one knows all the regulations.
Out of about 100, 150 odd responses?
Yeah, so there was a few responses, a lot of responses came through. Now, there was landlords on there that were portfolio landlords. What I mean by portfolio landlords, between 5 and 10 properties, they were only scoring 56%. I mean, the highest one was 80%.
Yeah.
So you've got people like that have a big portfolio that still don't know the regulations. I had landlords that were scoring only 20%, so they're pretty screwed. And so, like I said, the average percentage across all of the responses that I had was probably around 65%. So again, and these were general questions about gas safety certificates, EICRs, EPCs, deposit registration, right to rents, just the basic stuff that we hear every single day about what needs to be done. And they were still getting it wrong. Yeah. So that just shows that even people out there that have been doing it a long time, that are portfolio landlords...
And those are people who are choosing to do a quiz on compliance, which isn't particularly sexy.
No.
Way of spending your kind of Wednesday evening on
it was
on
quite
social
hard
media,
actually coming up with the scorecard. So I was like, regulation.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, God.
I think the big difference is, I'm in my 20th year, I think, of doing this, is when I first started, you'd say, okay, this is our letting fee and this is how much we charge to write up the tenancy agreement. And this is how much we charge for an inventory. I think that's pretty much everything we charged for. And a lot of landlords turn around and go, you know what, I've got my own tenancy agreement, don't worry about it, just find me the tenant. And there's very little you could say. It was like, okay, all right, fair enough. Whereas now, it's just absolutely no way. You used to be able to, I don't know if you still can, you used to be able to go to Smith's and buy an AST.
Yeah, you can still do that.
For about 20 quid or 15 quid, and you just fill it in yourself, and it was a couple of pages. But that was the situation. It's like I will rent my property. John Smith will rent my property to Jane Doe for £700 a month for 6 months.
Well, you
promise to pay the rent, keep it well, and leave at the end of the tenancy agreement, which was pretty much the bare bones of the tenancy. And how that's evolved over the last few years into like you say, effectively the estate agent or the letting agent becomes a client money handler, an immigration authority, a condition responsibility, everything. Appointed representative effectively for the government for ensuring the safety of the property.
Yeah.
Or if they don't have an agent, the landlord is that person. So as a landlord, can you, hand on heart, say you have done enough training to identify whether that person has the right to live and work in the UK?
Yeah.
No chance.
No chance. And then...
Well, I'm sure some might.
Well,
but
yeah. I'm sure some are registered and they've done their qualifications. Or you might have landlords that were in a state agency before, so they know it, they're quite comfortable at themselves. So look, you're always going to have that people, and fair play to them. If they've done the training and they've done and they're registered and all of that sort of stuff, then great. You've
nothing like an ex-estate agent.
No.
So there's a reason why they're an ex-estate agent normally, 9 times out of 10. And we get a lot of ex-estate agents who actually put their business with us because they don't want to deal with it.
Yeah, a lot of them
They know it's just not even worth
they know
it.
how time-consuming it can be. They know how much hassle it can be. So, we get a lot of them. I mean, one of the things that we didn't touch on was that, obviously, the ongoing tenancy and the management of the ongoing tenancy and doing the property inspections and having that communication with the tenant. I've heard from clients that they haven't been to their property for 2 years. They haven't heard from their tenant for 2 years. That'd be a massive red flag for
everything must be fine. I never hear from them. Is the
rubbish.
Biggest red flag.
That is the biggest red flag. But again, if you were a self-managing landlord, you would have to make sure that you get those booked in, take time to go and visit the property, create that relationship with the tenant. As in an agent, that's part of their process.
And if you are with an estate agency, it's really important that you keep them honest. Set a reminder in your calendar if they're doing it twice a year. Well, if they did the first one on the 1st of June, 1st of December, hi there, where's my report? Because whilst to an extent on this podcast, we're preaching the virtue of letting agents can be crap.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've heard of some that have been crap.
Yeah. We spent the morning with a surveyor talking about how they've been employed to look after the refurbishment of a 5-bedroom house after it was rented to a drug dealer because the ID checks weren't done properly. It's an interesting topic, but that property hadn't been visited because the property manager hadn't done their job properly. So yes, the agency was liable, and that's good for the owner that they're liable, but it shouldn't have happened in the first place. So if you're employing a letting agent to do the job for you, keep them on their toes.
Yeah. And ask them the correct questions when instructing them to manage a property. What's your process? What's your internal process? What contractors do you use? How long have you been working with your contractors locally? What exactly do the tenants have access to? What do I have access to? Ask in-depth questions and put them on the spot, because some landlords, when they're talking to an agent about management, an agent would just turn around and say, don't worry, we'll look after everything. We've got everything covered. These are the basic things. And then this landlord thinks it's fantastic. But actually, their internal process is so rubbish that within 3 to 6 months, you've got no communication with that person. You're dealing with people that know nothing about your property, that never visited your property. So again, if you're spending the money for someone to look after your investment, make sure that you ask the correct questions and do your research on the agent rather than just giving it to anybody.
I think it's key that you're in contact with the person who will be looking after your property rather than the salesperson. So analogy is if you ever want new windows fitted in your house, a salesman's going to come round who knows nothing about windows. It's the same in estate agency. The person who comes around to sell their business, to show you how great they are, knows nothing about, 9 times out of 10, knows very little about the actual property management, will have no involvement in it. They're purely a salesperson being put in front of you to pitch for your business rather than actually be the person who will look after you. You'll get a lot more sense out of a window fitter and you'll get a much more sense out of a property manager than you will the front guy or girl. in my experience. So ensure that when you do choose an agent, if you do choose an agent, okay, are you the person who's going to be looking after my house? If not, to be honest, you've got very little value to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Because tenants are 10 a penny.
Yeah.
In finding them, so I've no doubt you'll be able to do your job in 3 days flat, no problem. But what about the next 3 years?
Yeah.
That's what's of interest to me as a landlord.
Yeah, exactly. One thing that's just popped into my head actually when we were talking about contracts is that I worked for an agency a few years ago, and where I dealt with a client, and he was a let-only landlord, always done let-only for 10 years.
Yep.
And we found him a tenant, passed all referencing, everything was fine. And then further down the line, the tenant spoke to him and said, "Oh, I'm setting up my own business. Is it okay if I use the address as the business address and carry out business activities from the property?"
Yeah.
This landlord said, "Yeah, no problem at all." So anyway, doing that, he's effectively created a business tenancy now, because business activities were being run from the property. And when he tried getting his property back, the judge ruled that you're not getting your property back because it's a wrong tenancy. You've created a business tenancy. You haven't created any new tenancy agreement to effectively say that. And this went on for probably about 2 years trying to get possession of the property back.
Yeah,
and it cost the
horrendous.
landlord, that in the end, the landlord had to pay this guy to get out of his property. And I think it cost him about £80,000.
It's horrendous because I can put myself in the position of that landlord who was just trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
I imagine tenants been there, looked after it, paid the rent, and said, "Look, I'm changing. I'm going from working for someone to set them." I mean, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Here's, of course you can work for, look after it, whatever. But he's been done on a technicality, which is really, really unfortunate. And you feel for people like that because there's no way they'd have ever connected those dots.
No.
Whereas me or you, being the cynical old bastards that we are, would have gone, no.
Yeah.
You have to register that at a PO box address or a Regis or a, at your accountant's address, because that cannot be. You can work, by all means, work from home, but your business is not associated to that address.
Yeah.
And the landlord gone, why? That sounds like you're being a bit of an arsehole.
But once it's
because
explained,
it will never go wrong. They're not gonna do anything bad or this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
But the 1 in 100, you've just defined the 1 in 100 where, for whatever reason, the relationship did break down, and he did want the property back, and he couldn't get it because the tenant's got a technicality over him. And when you go to court, technicality is good enough. Basically, it's not common sense. It's by the letter of the law.
Yeah.
Should the tenant go? Yes. Does he have to? No.
No.
So
yeah, exactly. I mean, that again, it comes down to if you are a self-managing landlord out there, and your tenants are requesting anything that you're not too sure of, just give an agent, a reputable agent, a call and just get their advice. If an agent turns around to you and says they can't give that advice, or they're not going to give that advice because you're not a client of theirs, then sod 'em. Call another agent. Do not do anything until you speak to someone that can give you the correct advice, because something like that, I might have said, where you're trying to be nice to a tenant that's paid you rent, that's been in there for a long time.
I'm sure that landlord, he or she, was only ever trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
Because saying no to that would feel like morally the wrong thing to do. Like,
and landlords want to be helpful out there, but unfortunately, it can come back and bite you. Trying to be nice, the tenant's been great. Something might happen in the tenant's life where he's got no other options, and they could turn against you. Now, so look, we'll leave it there. Now, this episode wasn't to get self-managing landlords to stop what they're doing and instruct an agent to manage their property, but I thought it was just something worth talking about the pros and cons of doing it yourself compared to what an agent does, because it's a topic that was on a Facebook group, a big Facebook group as well, about 20,000 landlords in there. Like I said, 80% said always use an agent, 20% didn't. So wanted to obviously chat about it to see what do we think as agents, and what the pros and cons for everything. So hope you found the episode useful. We'll be back next week with another episode, but thank you for joining us, and that's it.
Till then,
bye bye.